Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me here on Extraordinary Connection, a devotional website with daily contributions by United Methodist pastors from across Michigan. Today, I want to talk about Nancy Green. Nancy Green was born into slavery in 1834 in the state of Kentucky. And while I can't say what she did during her time as a slave, after emancipation, she was a nanny and cook for the Walker family, first in Kentucky and then later up in Chicago. At age 56, Nancy was hired to be the living trademark for the David Milling Company. The company had just invented a new self-rising pancake recipe, and they were looking for a spokesperson to represent the product. Nancy was hired to play the character Aunt Jemima, a fictional black mammy who worked as a slave for the Colonel Higby, preparing for the colonel and his family her wholesome pancakes. As the backstory goes, designed by the marketing people at the company, Aunt Jemima at the end of the Civil War and with the death of the colonel gave her pancake recipe some soldiers from the North so they could enjoy them and remember the fictional Higby family that she so loved. And I found this ad, which is from 1954, and I can't zoom in anymore on the image, but the caption says, "Guest for breakfast was a custom at the Colonel Higby's plantation. Everyone, it seemed, wanted to taste Aunt Jemima's pancakes with a lightness and flavor no other cook could achieve." You can read more about this in Patricia Turner's book, Ceramic Uncles and Celluloid Mammies, if you really want to dig deep into Aunt Jemima's character. So Aunt Jemima was from the beginning more than an image on a box or a newspaper article. She had a whole elaborate and detailed backstory of being a slave, the stereotypical house slave called a mammy. This is a picture from Gone the Wind with a character playing a mammy as well. Nancy's job was to be the living embodiment of that black slave character. So she would travel from speaking engagement to engagement and be a living commercial. She would sing for the gathered crowds. She would tell stories about her fictional time as a slave in the Colonel Higby house. And Nancy was pretty good at her job. She was really good at her job. Under her image, the product sold like hotcakes. And that pun is intended. And she really hit her peak at the World Columbian Expo in Chicago in 1893, where people were lined up for hours to hear Nancy speak and listen to her songs and stories of her time as a slave. Nancy, in modern terms, went viral, playing that black mammy and sharing her secret pancake recipe with the world. To put it into context, by 1910, 120 million Aunt Jemima breakfasts were sold annually, which was the population of the United States at the time. The David Milling Company knew they had a hit. They changed the name of the company to the Aunt Jemima Milling Company and gave Nancy a contract for life as the brand ambassador for the company. She remained their brand ambassador until her death in 1923, using her wealth to benefit civic groups and her church in the Chicago area. But her story doesn't stop there, does it? It continues on. The Aunt Jemima brand has been part of the American breakfast table ever since. Until recently, that is, when the Quaker Oats Company, the current owner of the Aunt Jemima brand, announced they were going to rename the product because it no longer held to their values, and they felt the brand idealized the institution of slavery. So as Christians, how should we respond? The rebranding of Aunt Jemima is one of several conversations that seem to be happening right now that involve statues and flags and mascots and movies and images. How should we react? What should our response be to these changes? So I'd like to offer a few thoughts for your consideration as you personally discern how to respond to these changes. First, we need to recognize with any brand or image or statue or whatever, there's a whole spectrum of reactions people might have interacting with it. And I'm going to use an example of Tennessee whiskey real quick. For some, Tennessee whiskey might conjure fond memories of carefree college parties with friends. For others, it might hold no significance whatever because they have no connection with the product one way or the other. And for yet another group, it might represent a temptation because they struggle with alcoholism. Or, in the more severe case, it might represent abuse. Abuse that someone received from a loved one who always drank Jack Daniel's whiskey before becoming violent. Our reactions to any one image are not universal. They represent a large spectrum of possibilities from painful to comforting, from nostalgic to nightmare. And we as Christians need to recognize that some people might feel differently, sometimes painfully, when confronted with a specific image. Second, we need to consider how many people are negatively impacted by the image. Is it one person? Is it a whole demographic? Is it a majority or a minority? How many people are hurt by the image? Sometimes percentages are a useful measure for me. So one person in the United States offended by Tennessee whiskey is a much, much different population than one person at a private dinner party. And third, are there options for change available? Again, using the example of the whiskey at a dinner party, if I know I will cause someone pain or discomfort by serving them whiskey, I can choose not to serve it. I can choose to have another drink available to my guests, even if that's my favorite drink of all time. Even though I might have a drink every night with my dinner, I can make a bit of a sacrifice for the person I love. And finally, we need to ask, what would Jesus do? Would Jesus recognize the pain? Would Jesus tell the person to just get over it? Where is Christ in the situation, and how would he react? So should you be upset about the renaming of the Aunt Jemima brand, or a statue coming down, or a sports team mascot being changed, or a flag no longer being flown over NASCAR events? I leave it to you to wrestle with those questions in prayer. In each situation, can you recognize that the representation might be offensive and painful to some? How many people are being hurt by the image? What could a company or an organization do to address any hurt? And what do you think Jesus would do? Would he be protesting to keep the brand, or would he ask for its removal? Would he dismiss someone's pain, or would he find a way to address it? I want to close with 1 Corinthians 8. The people of Corinth are having a debate. Should meat sacrificed to idols be eaten? Some said, it doesn't matter. It has no significance. Go ahead and eat it. Others were offended that anyone would eat the meat at all. Paul addresses the issue in his letter and says, if what I eat causes my brother to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again. That's 1 Corinthians 8:13. In other words, Paul is saying, I recognize someone is hurt by the choice. I know how many are hurt by that choice. I can change my actions, and I can change what I eat to not hurt my siblings in Christ. So I pray that you take these conversations seriously and do not dismiss them out of hand. I pray that you always look to Christ's perspective, from statue to flag, from pancake mix to mascot, and act in ways that won't cause your fellow person to fall, and to act in ways that show Christ's love to those that need it most right now. So I'll see you next week, my friends, at extraordinaryconnection.org.